I want to talk about something today that stems from our fourth Unitarian Universalist principle. We affirm and promote a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. Now, I'm not going to be talking about that principle, but my sermon derives from that principle. That phrase alone could get you several sermons. You know, what is truth? What is meaning? What is it to be free and responsible while you're searching for these things? If we search for them, have we made an assumption that there is such thing as truth and meaning that we can be searching for? These are all valuable questions, especially truth, because we live in a day and age where our politicians have shown us that truth really doesn't mean as much as it used to, and it's become almost a mockery to even expect people to tell the truth, at least in leadership positions. And yet, we say it matters. And I hope we don't give up that search. Meaning can be a much harder thing. You know, what does give us meaning? That's a very deep subject. Again, not what I'm talking about today. But let's assume, for the sake of argument, that there's truth and meaning worth searching for. Even if meaning is something very simple, like to actually have a connection with another sentient being. Just that simple. The more important point, at least for today, is that our search should be free and responsible. And part of that freedom and responsibility pertains to our search for and our willingness to learn from teachers. So we're going to be talking about our relationship to teachers, and as the sermon topic sort of gives away, I think ultimately we're our own best teacher, but that doesn't mean other teachers don't have a role. So as I've been doing lately in my sermons, I'm going to be talking about events from my life. These may not resonate with you, what I say may not resonate with you, and that's perfectly okay. I don't expect anyone to believe anything I say just because I'm standing up here and I'm your speaker for the week. But hopefully, what I say will give you something to think about and might help you out. I've been doing the search for truth and meaning thing a great deal in my life. Not because I knew what Unitarian Universalists were or what the fourth principle was, but because I was worried about my eternal state. Having grown up in evangelical Christianity, you know, I was always worried about what would happen after I died. I spoke more recently here about my atheism and how it had freed me from the guilt that I had because I always felt like I had to save other people. And afterwards, one of our members came up, Miss Lynn, came up and talked to me about this notion that, you know, we don't realize how much our brains are formed at the very earliest stages of our life. And it's almost like programming, and it's very hard to break out of that programming. And for me, breaking out of that programming was a very real thing. Breaking out of that fear of hell and eternal damnation took a lot of time and effort. Breaking out of that mindset was part of my search for truth and meaning. I did not get to that point because of a particular teacher, but I did have a huge variety of inputs from many sources. And in the process, I also had to reject a great many teachings and teachers that I have had earlier in my life. I had to say, I no longer consider what you said to be true or valuable or helpful in my search for truth and meaning. And I had to start viewing what people said who were authorities with some skepticism. Because there's all sorts of authorities out there. They often contradict each other. And therefore, by definition, they're really not that authoritative, are they? And I had to start learning to trust myself. I had to start learning to trust my instincts, my gut, my logic, my reason, my capability of getting through this life and making sense of it. But even today, very different than I was 30 years ago, I still see many examples of dangerous over-reliance on teachers. I see it even in things that I value today, like my practice of Zen Buddhism. So I'm going to give you two examples, one from my life and one not. In Buddhism, there are endless stories about a teacher and a student who have an incredibly close connection over many, many years. The student has to learn pretty much how to think exactly like the teacher, or at least to have those insights. In fact, there's even this phrase they use for it: the eyebrows become intertwined. Now that sounds a little weird. It's not face to face, but rather it's like negating the fact that you have physical heads. If your head were now inside the head of your teacher, you're thinking like your teacher, you're looking out at the world through the eyes like your teacher, your eyebrows are intertwined. That's what it means. You are now seeing things the way your teacher does. You have learned all there is to learn. And when that happens, you receive Dharma transmission. That means the teacher says, I've taught you everything there is to teach. I think you are on solid ground. You can go out and teach now, and I give you my authority. And they actually, in many schools of Buddhism, will then write this down in their historical records, allegedly maintaining a lineage of teacher to student going all the way back to the Buddha. Now, most people don't think that's a literal lineage, but it makes for a nice story at least. But it does show it's also something very serious. So if you want to receive this Dharma transmission, you have to study under a teacher for a great deal of time, if it's done right, and pass all sorts of tests. But the tests you have to pass are very strange compared to our Western way of thinking, and I'll get to that a little later. Pema Chodron, who is a famous Buddhist nun, teacher, writer, someone who's been on shows with famous people like Oprah Winfrey, and is well respected in the Buddhist community, writes this in her book, When Things Fall Apart. And she's going to talk about this bond between teacher and student, which is called samaya. Making a formal samaya bond and entering into an unconditional relationship with a teacher is like putting yourselves in the jaws of a crocodile. We need to take a long time to decide we trust that particular crocodile enough to stick with him or her, no matter what. Now, that's kind of amusing, but here's the second paragraph. Long after I became his student, and the teacher we're talking about here is Chogyam Trungpa, and long after I began Vajrayana practice, which is that branch of Buddhism she practiced, long after practitioners usually take the formal vows with their teacher, I finally knew without any doubt that I could trust him with my life, no matter what he said or did. He was my link with the sacred world. Without him, I wouldn't have a clue as to what that meant. It simply evolved that as I followed his teachings and woke up further, I finally realized his limitless kindness and experience and the vastness of his mind. At that point, the only place I wanted to be was in the jaws of the crocodile. Now, this is not written as a warning. This is written as, because I just read this book very recently, this is written to explain how a relationship between student and teacher should be in her eyes. Now, those words should probably set off little alarm bells in your head, even more so if you know more about her teacher. For Trungpa was, first of all, very influential in North America, spreading an esoteric form of Tibetan Buddhism across the U.S. and Canada. He founded the Naropa Institute in Boulder, Colorado, which today is Naropa University. It is the first accredited Buddhist university in our country. He wrote many books which are well regarded, and I think we even have one out on our shelf, Overcoming Spiritual Materialism, which is still considered a classic. And yet, despite all this, he died of liver disease due to his heavy drinking at the age of 48. He was a heavy smoker, allegedly used large quantities of cocaine, had sexual relationships with many of his students, even though he was married. He was also accused of rape. In fact, Pema Chodron had a student come to her and say she was raped, and Chodron said, I don't believe you, and if you did have sex, I think you were into it. She has since apologized for that, but decades after the fact. According to Trungpa's former student, Stephen Butterfield, Trungpa told us that if we ever tried to leave, we would suffer unbearable, subtle, continuous anguish, and disasters would pursue us like furies. His strange antics could fill an entire sermon, and in fact have filled an entire documentary that was on Netflix, and may still be. And yet, this is the person that Pema Chodron trusted. To this day, she seems unable to reconcile his teachings and his irresponsible and allegedly criminal behavior. And she said something like, even when he was drunk during many of his talks, he made more sense than most people do sober. So let's look again at what she said. I finally knew without any doubt that I could trust him with my life. No matter what he said or did, he was my link with the sacred world. I would encourage you to take this as a cautionary tale. Don't ever surrender yourself to that much, ever. To someone that much, ever. Have more trust in yourself. My second story is personal. As part of my ongoing training in Zen, we have this thing called koan introspection. Koans are these strange little sayings or riddles that you're supposed to meditate on, and they help you to start thinking differently or wake up or become enlightened. For instance, what was your face before your parents were born? Or what is the sound of one hand? Or, the most famous one, known as the Mu koan. A monk asked Master Chao Chu, has the dog the Buddha nature or not? Chao Chu said, Mu. Not moo like a cow, mu, M-U. Translated into English, it often means no, not, negative, possibly non-existence. Usually something like that, not being. Yes?
I'm sorry to interrupt, but someone driving a Burgundy Odyssey, the vehicle is not parked in the church parking lot, it is on private property, and if we don't get it moved, they're going to tow it.
Anyone?
That's why I don't.
We'll find you a spot.
Thank you. So, back to the koan. You are supposed to take this koan, what's known as the Mu koan, and you're supposed to think on this when you do your meditation, or as we call it, zazen, seated meditation. And you are supposed to share your insights with your teacher. So, I joined an online teacher who I respect very much, and I thought he was a great guy. I never had any issues with him as far as his morality or ethics or anything. And when you join, you take courses, you do lessons, and he responds and stuff, and you meet with him twice a month for 15 minutes online, Skyping. And after about 6, 7, 8 months, whenever he thinks you're ready, you get to try to do koan introspection. So I finally got the Mu koan and started sitting with that. Now, if you think about the simplicity of this koan, what do you think about when you're sitting for like 25 minutes at a time and you're just playing this thing over and over in your head? What is it? What's this supposed to do for you? So I did this for months and months, and I would talk to him and give him different little insights I got, and he'd nod and say, well, that's good, keep going. And finally one day I said, you know, I've run out of ideas. I really don't know what it is I'm expected to do anymore. And he'd say, just sit with Mu. Well, I don't know what that means. And he'd say, well, it doesn't even have to be Mu. It can be any word. Just sit with any word. And I'd, okay, what does that mean? And he'd say something, well, you have to become Mu. I don't know what that means. What do you want me to do when I sit down? I have nothing more. So unless you can give me some kind of guidance as to what I'm supposed to be doing when I'm sitting there, I'm just going to go back to sitting. I'm just going to sit quietly because I don't know even what Mu is supposed to be doing at this point. And he couldn't give me any other answers. Now, in fairness, people will work on the Mu koan for years, decades in some cases. So, you know, obviously I could be guilty of just being impatient, but I didn't know what working with Mu meant, and maybe my brain just doesn't work that way. So finally I had to do the cost-benefit analysis, because this isn't free. And I'm not ragging on him for taking money, because he deserves the money he gets. He put together a good program. But I finally just had to say, this just doesn't make any sense to me anymore, and we're sort of hitting a wall, and I'm going to withdraw. Now the thing is, as a teacher, he didn't say, "Oh, you're making a horrible mistake," or "Pain and destruction will pursue you like furies." He didn't do that. He understood. He was really cool. And he said, "Come back anytime you want. You've been a good student," and I thought he was a good teacher. But maybe koan introspection just isn't for me. And that's one of the points I want to bring up as you're working with teachers and trying to find truth and meaning. If a teacher says, "There's only one way, and it's good for everybody," run away. Because we don't all learn the same way. Anyone who's been in education knows that. Anyone who's had children knows that. Anyone who's been married knows that. We don't all learn the same way. Jancy's perfect, by the way. She's learning about how I learn. So I did make the decision not to do koan introspection anymore, although every now and then I will sit with Moo and I will ponder if dogs have a Buddha nature or not, and what no means in response to that, because allegedly everything has a Buddha nature. That's another sermon too. But I did make the call, this isn't working for me right now, and it's time to say goodbye to this teacher. But again, his name's Dosho Port. He's a great guy. I highly recommend him to anyone who wants to give it a try. He has a really good program. But it wasn't working for me. So sometimes you're going to have to make that kind of a call too. You might be in a situation where you think you're supposed to be learning something and it's not working for you, or alarm bells are going off in your head about some aspect of it. The point of this sermon is sometimes it's okay to trust yourself. We're really good at denigrating ourselves and thinking the teacher obviously knows better than I do. That's why they're the teacher and I'm the student. But have some faith in yourself too. Know what really is working as you try to find truth and meaning. In this respect, you are your own best teacher, because no one can get inside your head. Eyebrows intertwining and all that aside, no one's really going to get inside your head that much. Have a little faith in you. Now, am I saying that you shouldn't learn from a teacher? Of course not. But I think there is this tendency to surrender too much to teachers, especially in the realm of religion or philosophy or spirituality, whatever it is that has importance in your life. You find someone who's got a PhD in it, or ministry degree or something. They have a church and they're a pastor or a leader of some sort, and it's well, obviously they've been through so much more than I have. I should just shut up and learn from them. Sometimes that doesn't work out so well. Oftentimes it doesn't. Don't surrender. Learn from, but don't surrender your common sense. Here's some things I think teachers should have as characteristics. Things you should look for if you value my opinion. Which is really kind of ironic. I'm about to give you an opinion after I said trust yourself, but take it or leave it. When you are looking to learn from somebody, first of all, they should not claim to know things that are unknowable. The first, and I've said this so many times, it's almost tiring, I'm sure, for you to hear it. If someone says, "I know how God thinks," run away. No one knows how God thinks. No one knows if there is a God, really. We have strong opinions about it. But if someone says, "Here's what makes God happy," how do you know what makes God happy? So no, maybe. Can God even be happy? Who knows? So that's something, and there's a lot of teachers who will tell you that. Number two, they should not expect people to learn in exactly the same way. I already covered that. They should allow for the way individuals think differently. Number three, they should absolutely not abuse the power they have over you, over anyone else, over money, over politics, whatever. If they are doing things they shouldn't be doing, do not cut them slack and say it's okay because they're so spiritual. That happens a lot. It sure happens in Buddhism a lot in the West, probably in the East too, because probably few religions are that dogmatic about surrendering to a teacher. And fortunately in the West we're getting away from that. Don't surrender to someone who's abusive. Don't even give them the credence that you would give to a good teacher. Call them on it or leave. Number 4, they should offer insights with the full knowledge that you might reject it, and they should not take offense if you do. That's one of the reasons I have such respect for Dosho Port. I told him it wasn't working for me. I told him the problems I was having, and he said, that's fine. That's great. He didn't say, oh, I put all this work into this and put this together and I know what I'm doing and you're just blowing off all my wisdom. No, he said, that's cool, come back if you want to try it again. That's a good teacher. I'll close with a portion of a blog posting by a teacher I've often talked about and find very helpful. Brad Warner, who has written many books, some of which we have out here on our shelf. He's a Zen priest, but not like you would think a normal Zen priest. He always wears blue jeans and t-shirts, likes Godzilla, plays in a punk band, but also takes his Zen very seriously and writes in a down-to-earth manner I've always appreciated. And in a very recent blog post that I read, because this inevitably happens when I'm writing a sermon, something falls in my lap that fits in, he says on his blog, Hardcore Zen, on Twitter recently, someone said to me, if I were a Dharma heir, that's the person who's received Dharma transmission, as I discussed, and he is one. If I were a Dharma heir with a large following, I would be using this critical moment in history as a teaching device, using what wisdom I have to comfort and instruct those who are upset. I asked the person who said that what he or she would teach. I never got an answer. Maybe the person who told me that thought I was trying to be funny, but I wasn't. I really wanted to know. I really wanted to read the person's answer. Maybe that person had figured out what I have not been able to figure out in 20 years of trying, by writing books, blogs, making videos, talking to people in many places around the world. In all of these cases, I was attempting to do the exact same thing. But the person on Twitter said that he or she would do it if they were in my position. I'm not trying to make fun of that person. There was a time when I felt the same way about other people. There was a time when I felt like my teacher should be doing a better job. Sometimes I even felt like I could do a better job if I were in their position. On the one hand, I know I'm not the kind of wise man people want me to be, just like my teachers and the many others whose words I admired were not the kind of wise men and wise women I wanted them to be. Wisdom doesn't belong to me. It doesn't belong to anyone. The best that any of us can strive for is to put ourselves aside and allow wisdom a channel to come through. Sometimes it happens. Sometimes it surprises me. I'm sure it surprises my teachers too. Every moment is a critical moment. What can I say about this one? Honestly, I have no idea. As you look for teachers, I suggest you find ones that don't claim to have all the answers, and who know when it's best to admit that they are ignorant. All teachers are human, fallible, and prone to the same mistakes and errors you are. If you understand this, you can protect yourself, honor your self-worth, and filter teachings through this understanding. The best student-teacher relationships start and must start with mutual respect. That begins by respecting yourself and respecting what you bring to the learning process. You are the one who will have to take each moment of your life and see what you can learn from it. We call external forces the teacher when we learn something, but even as you learn, are you not teaching yourself how to learn, how not to be ignorant? Or are you teaching yourself it's not important to be aware and it's better to remain ignorant? No one's going to do this teaching for you. So in this sense, you must be the teacher, even as you are a student. We will never be as wise as we wish to be, but often we are better than we give ourselves credit. And even when we feel lost or ignorant, if we are paying attention, sometimes wisdom will break through. And if it doesn't, we press on, doing the best we can with what we have and what we are. And maybe this really is all the wisdom we need. Don't ever lose hope, don't ever give up, and thank you for being here today.